This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
Detroit is the greatest!
Straight up light you on fire for a Coney dog right now.
Darren McCarty comes back with Neiman on front of him. McCarty draws. McCarty in. McCarty scores! A magnificent goal! Darren McCarty!
Stafford takes, throws, end zone, Calvin, touchdown, Detroit Lions!
Welcome in, everybody, to the latest edition of the Motor City Sports Rant. I am the Doc, John Macaroon, flying solo on this podcast recording. Oh my goodness, the sporting world here in Detroit woke up Monday morning and was rocked. Everybody that pays attention and follows on Twitter, anyone that follows Adrian Wojnarowski, they woke up early Monday morning and everybody was blown away. So what happened? John Beilein, head coach of the Michigan Wolverines, somebody that everybody in town that followed college basketball, revered. Everybody respected him greatly. And after the season that Michigan had, people were a little bit concerned regarding the early departures. But by and large, Michigan fan was puffing their chest out. They realized that, look, Michigan has performed very well in college basketball. John Beilein, to his credit, he came in there really without a lot of fanfare. Now, those in the know knew what he was capable of. His tenure in college basketball, he had a decent tenure, but he really got an opportunity to make a name for himself at the University of Michigan. Because remember, at the time that John Beilein was hired, it was a tough time there at Michigan. They had fallen way behind Michigan State. They were getting blown out in contests by 30, 40. The morale was down. Bill Martin goes out there and decides that I'm going to take a chance on John Beilein, and he comes in. And early on, it took a couple seasons to kind of get acclimated as to what he wanted to instill. But in the latter part of his tenure at Michigan, oh my goodness. As a Spartan fan, I can honestly say that whenever Michigan State would take on Michigan, you truly were concerned because of the fact that the teams that he brought in were prepared. They were excelling in a lot of different areas. And he caught up with the times in terms of the fact that now in college basketball, hell, even across the NBA, what is the game of basketball looking like? It's an offensive game. It's a game predicated on taking and making a high percentage of three-point shots. So give John Beilein credit for what he was able to do. And so Monday morning, you start scrolling through Twitter, you start reading the reaction and the news, and you're like, okay, where did John Beilein go? Where, if he's going to go to the NBA, what team did he go with? Is he going to join a staff? Is he going to take over a team that, has a strong chance of winning the NBA title? He's going to Cleveland, the Cleveland Cavaliers. And everybody was just like, huh? Cleveland leaving Michigan for the Cavs? To be honest, I don't know how well, or I don't know what to expect from John Beilein coaching in the NBA because he's never done it. So those that are speculating and wondering, well, will that system that he had at Michigan, is it going to work in the NBA? Now, you got to wait and see. The first couple seasons that are going to take place with John Beilein in Cleveland probably aren't going to be that great. But I do think if he's given a roster that can actually fulfill what he brings to the table in terms of offense, if the Cavs get lucky and they win the NBA draft lottery, and they're able to maybe even draft number one, Zion Williamson, then there's a strong opportunity that, you know what, John Beilein could actually get the Cavs to the playoffs. Remember, the Cavs are in the East, and the East is not that strong. So I would look at it and say, you know what, give it time. I think that John Beilein has the tools necessary. He has the ability to go there and instill a winning culture, but it's going to take time. What brass that Dan Gilbert, the owner of the Cavaliers, has to go out there and not only pinch a guy that was highly regarded in college basketball, but the preeminent coach in the state of Michigan, Tom Izzo, John Beilein, 1-2. And what a coup for Dan Gilbert. I'm quite surprised, actually, talking to you guys about this, in that John Beilein had done such a great job in terms of bringing in a culture that that Michigan was really on the map in college basketball. I mean, making the Final Four repeatedly, having strong teams, starting a season 17-0, having a lot of national respect, being on par with Tom Izzo in terms of really competing for high-end athletes, really competing game in, game out. Prior to the 2018 season, Michigan was giving Michigan State all it could handle, winning Big Ten titles, having strong runs in the NCAA tournament, really getting guys that could shoot lights out and perform at a high level. I mean, Mo Wagner going to the NBA. So the caliber of player that was being brought in was really, really elevated. And so I think that's why a Michigan fan is really concerned. And I do want to spend a couple moments talking about maybe a couple reasons why he decided to leave. Some will speculate that the departures early of a couple of players this year really took a toll. Some talk regarding the FBI investigation and what it has revealed actually in terms of what these athletes are potentially asking for when John Beilein sits across from them. It's got to be tough. One, not only that you got to recruit full time. Remember, recruiting is a super tough business, being that you got to be on the road, you got to sell the Michigan program, you got to compete with Duke, Carolina, Kentucky, Tom Izzo. You have to deal with negative recruiting, those that maybe prior to this year were telling athletes, look, John Beilein, he's going to bolt for the NBA, don't trust him. Those that would negatively recruit against him. It's a tough business, and one in which you got to give these coaches credit who spend so much time on the road. And so, obviously, you put in that time. John Beilein sits there and tries to tell these young athletes why they should come to Michigan, why they should get an education at the University of Michigan, what they can do for the program and how they can grow and how they can contribute to a team that's likely going to have a lot of success. And then 1 year later, to turn around and then just bolt for the money, that's got to be tough for a coach like that. It's got to be tough for John Beilein because of the fact that the competition for these athletes is super tough. I mean, you got to go in there and compete with the likes of the top of the line coaches. And then realizing that some of these coaches at lesser schools might be using some really, really dirty tactics in terms of paying these athletes, in terms of guaranteeing roster spots and minutes and things like that. So when John Beilein surveys the landscape and he sees that there's this massive FBI probe and a lot of these top-end athletes are being discovered and it's kind of being recognized that these athletes are getting in contact with boosters, they're getting in contact with people they're not supposed to be, and they're receiving these outrageous benefits that the likes of Tom Izzo and John Beilein just aren't going to do. It's evident that it weighs on these coaches because it's super tough to compete, and when you're competing against big dollars, it's going to be a super tough uphill climb. So in putting the puzzle together, do you think out there that John Beilein made the right move? Feel free, message us on our Twitter page at Detroit Podcast. If you want to leave a voicemail, 248-579-8686. We'll air some of the great calls and voicemails that we receive. Remember, the voicemail is completely uncensored. You can say whatever you want. You got about 90 seconds to about 100 seconds, a minute and a half or so to speak your mind, and you can get your voice heard worldwide. 248-579-8686. So do you think out there that John Beilein made the right choice? I mean, a coach who's 66 years old that maybe is looking out there and realizing that there's not going to be too many more opportunities for him to get an NBA job, and everybody that's kind of evaluating NBA jobs will come in and they'll say, look, it's much easier. You're not having to recruit. You're not having to be on the road. Yes, you are playing a lot more games, but you're dealing with older men. You're dealing with professionals. And all John Beilein has to worry about is instilling a system that these athletes will buy into and going out there and executing. Do I think he'll be a good head coach in the NBA? I really do. I think a man like that with experience should be able to garner respect. But here's the tough part in terms of coaching in the NBA. Can he deal with the egos? Can he deal with those guys that are on a last year of a contract and then maybe having eyes to leaving? Can he deal and manage a locker room of professionals? Because you got to remember, John Beilein has been used to dealing with young kids, and eventually what could happen was if they didn't listen, he could take away playing time and they would end up respecting him, and the older veterans, the juniors and seniors, would handle business and you could maintain a professional environment. In the NBA, it's pretty evident that these guys have sources. These guys can go outside of the organization and really reveal secrets and cause a bunch of chaos if they get unhappy. And dealing with some of these diva athletes will be interesting and fascinating. If John Beilein has to have a conversation with Tristan Thompson and he's all wearing a fur coat, and then all of a sudden he's got to be distracted and have his attention diverted because of the fact that Khloe Kardashian or one of the celebrities that he's dating is going to be calling up and complaining about, hey, you got caught again cheating, your name's in the tabloids, you're going through another breakup. By that point in time, maybe Khloe and Tristan get back together. So you realize that there's just a lot more to deal with in terms of the media, in terms of these athletes, their entourages, their agents, and in terms of these big personalities, in terms of dealing with 12 to 15 guys with huge egos, huge personalities, bringing them in and handling a lot of the outside noise will be a fun challenge. I'm sure that John Beilein will be up for, but it's just more. It's just different, but it's just going to be one of those things where John Beilein has to go in there with the understanding that, hey, I'm going to foster this environment. I want to create this kind of culture. And I think for the Cleveland Cavaliers, they got a good guy. They got a good man. Widely respected, will do things correctly. And if he's given 4 or 5 years, I think the Cleveland Cavaliers are going to have some success. But they have an uphill climb for sure. The Cavs may indeed be tanking. So what will it be like to play an entire NBA season when you're only going to win maybe 20 games? I believe the Cavs won 19 games this past season. What will it be like to actually go out there with kind of no expectation, whereas John Beilein has been used to for the better part of the last 5 or 6 years, going out there and at least being competitive, somewhat competitive in the Big Ten and nationally in terms of having a lot more wins than losses. So John Beilein will have to adjust. It'll be fascinating to see who he takes over there to Cleveland. But all in all, I think it was the right choice. When you look at the entire landscape of college basketball, it's seedy. It's not pleasant. It's not one in which it's hopeful right now for a lot of coaches, especially that get up there in age. I mean, you got to do a lot of work. You got to put in a lot of time. You got to convince a lot of family members that Michigan's the right place to play. And then the NBA, for those that don't know, they're probably going to do away with the one and done rule. And it will open up the floodgates for high school athletes who have supreme talent that are told, hey, you have some talent, it's time for you to go to the NBA. They can just bypass altogether university life. They don't have to sit and act like they really care about school for the 1 year. They can just jump directly from high school to the NBA. And I think realizing that as well made it so that John Beilein's recognizing the job is way harder, and you're not going to have the availability to get some of these athletes that you would have, because those that are talented enough to be in the NBA, they're just going to go. So all in all, when you weigh the pros and the cons, John Beilein did the right thing. But for Michigan fan, are you upset? Are you frustrated? Do you feel like he left you high and dry in May? The timing seems questionable in terms of the fact the season ended about 6 to 7 weeks ago. Why didn't he do it then? Did Cleveland just make the call now? I mean, this late in the process makes it super tough, super challenging to go out there and replace Beilein with a named coach. A lot of these coaches are already deep in the midst of recruiting. They've already started to get their rosters filled out. They're already, looking forward to the next upcoming season. So to get a name coach that has the same influence that John Beilein would have had is going to be super tough. And I think that the timing puts you in a tough spot. Now, Ward Manuel has come out and said that last year when John Beilein was being courted by the Pistons and had a formal interview, that they had a name, that they did cultivate a list of names that potentially could have been looked at by the Wolverines. So they had kind of a sense that maybe John Beilein might be peaking at the NBA. So Michigan has done their due diligence. And now Ward Manuel is going to go out there and conduct, as he said in a press release, a thorough national search out there to see who can come in and handle this job. And I think John Beilein can leave with his head held high because he made Michigan into a national powerhouse, one in which I think if you go out there and Ward Manuel makes the call and says, hey, we want you, it's going to be taken seriously. Now, can you go out there and get a Jay Wright? Can you go out there and get a Billy Donovan? I think it's going to be tougher. Now, do I believe that Jim Harbaugh and the aura of the Michigan football team is looming large over the basketball program? No, because if you look at it critically and honestly, the work that John Beilein did speaks for itself. He actually, in my opinion, made Michigan basketball outshine Michigan football, whereas many fans are comparing Harbaugh not to other great coaches. They're comparing and wondering, why can't Jim Harbaugh, perform at the level as John Beilein? I think that for those that say that Jim Harbaugh is this looming big figure over the entire Wolverine athletic department, I think that's misguided. I think that the work that John Beilein did was actually to the point where you can almost honestly debate that Michigan became known for being a basketball school. The success, obviously, the wins, the national respect, the expectations favored the basketball team. And again, credit to John Beilein for being able to really put Michigan on the map. But do I think that Jim Harbaugh is one of the reasons why John Beilein is leaving? No, I think that's silly. That's not really a rational argument. Now, is Michigan football a lot more covered? Are there a lot more rabid fans of football? For sure. But I don't think that John Beilein was feeling the weight of fans or feeling like he was being neglected. He was paid handsomely. He was afforded by Michigan the opportunity to upgrade Chrysler Arena. The facilities improved. The athletes that were brought in definitely evolved and became NBA caliber under the watch of the Michigan basketball program. So for those that think that Michigan basketball has been neglected, get out of here with that. It's not the case. It's not the case at all. The reason you could be upset is the fact that, I think the run is over. The ability to get to the Sweet 16 and beyond year in, year out for the next couple years, I think is over. Meaning that, you know how hard it is when you bring in a whole new staff, a whole new crew of coaches, and now should Michigan decide to go outside the program and bring in a predominant coach, maybe the coach from Texas Tech, maybe a coach that's been under the radar, similar to John Beilein when he was brought in from West Virginia. If you bring in a new staff, they're going to want to bring in their own culture, their own system, and some of the athletes that you have remaining that decided to stay and not bolt for the NBA. It's going to be tough to have the level of success that you've enjoyed for the better part of the last decade. So don't just assume that Michigan's going to roll and continue to have this great level of success, with a new coach. Now, there's a chance Michigan stays in-house. Now, the strong candidates are in-house. Assistant coaches Luke Yakelich and Sadi Washington are names that have emerged. I kind of just feel like the job for Michigan should be one in which that the guy that takes the chair, the guy that will sign a 5-year contract or more, should be a coach that has experience, that also has experience in the NCAA tournament. I think that Michigan now has been afforded the opportunity to go out there and have a pick of the litter regarding coaches, and I think if they settle on an assistant, that might not be the best sign for Michigan fans. That might not be a good sign that the university is able to go out there and maybe pull someone away from an institution that they've maybe already working at. So let me know what you think. Who is your number one candidate? Who is the guy that you say, hey, this guy should be brought here no matter what? Who is your leading candidate? Feel free, message anytime at Detroit Podcast or leave a voicemail, 248-579-8686. After the break, I'm going to have Vito on the line. I want to get his sense of how surprised he was that Michigan lost John Beilein to the NBA, and I want to get his take regarding the future of Michigan basketball. He's in the know. He covers Michigan, and he'll let us know what he thinks regarding the breaking news that occurred earlier on Monday. John Beilein, no longer the coach of the Michigan Wolverines. I want to tell everybody about one of the great sponsors of the Detroit Sports Podcast Network, and that's the Motor City Pawn Brokers. We would not be able to keep the studio lights on, the microphones hot, if we didn't have great sponsors, and one of them is the Motor City Pawn Brokers. With their support, we've been able to cover sporting events live, we've been able to get new staff, we've been able to expand the network thanks to the Motor City Pawn Brokers. There are 4 great locations that you can go into. They're working hard there. The crew is dedicated to changing everyone's perception regarding pawn shops. I mean, years ago, people would view pawn shops as being a seedy place, not a place that they want to be in. Well, that's all changed. Mark and the crew, they're working hard daily to establish a strong customer support base. When you walk into one of their 4 locations, they treat you with respect. They want to foster a relationship that not only means that one transaction, but they want to keep you coming back. And that's why Mark and the crew treat everybody really well. If you're looking for great deals or you want to find that unique antique that maybe is available at these pawn shops, go check out MotorCityPawnBrokers.com. That's MotorCityPawnBrokers.com. Changing Detroit's attitude regarding pawn shops. The Motor City Pawnbrokers are the elite pawnbrokers in town. All right, on this newsworthy day, I got a chance to catch up with Vito. What's up, brother?
I'm doing well. Big news down in Ann Arbor, huh?
Where were you when you heard the news that John Beilein's no longer the coach of the Michigan Wolverines?
Well, you know what? I was at a certain job, and not at Tomcat Sales, though, where my boss is a former Michigan quarterback, and John Wangler, but somewhere before that. And actually, I didn't know what the heck was going on until I was checking out Twitter, and I saw my phone blowing up via @Detroit Podcast on Twitter. Then I found out through your tweeting, Johnny, actually, that John Beilein was leaving Ann Arbor for the Cleveland Cavaliers of all positions in the NBA. And I was devastated at first, but I'm a man of objectivity, which somebody on the other end of this phone line cannot say himself. So how I view it is that John Beilein is bettering himself and his family, and from my knowledge, receiving a fatter paycheck over 5 years with the Cavaliers, who are coming off a hugely disappointing campaign, and they were taken all year long, but now are in position to land Zion Williamson with the #1 overall draft pick. The draft lottery being Tuesday night of this week, they could land that #1 overall position and draft Zion from Duke. Now, if that doesn't occur, well, it's not the best start to Beilein's career with the Cavs. Now, they could also have the #2, #3 overall selection and land another great player such as R.J. Barrett from Duke. So there are other great players at the top of this year's draft, and that would set up John Beilein very well for the near future and the long-term future with the Cavaliers.
How upset are you at John Beilein? Because some will say, well, it's late in the process. He left Michigan right after a couple of the players left. Are you mad, or are you saying, you know what, he took Michigan from a spot where they were really struggling in the world of college basketball, and he brought them a great level of success? What's the fairest way you're looking at the departure of John Beilein?
Well, do you remember where the Michigan Wolverines were before John Beilein got there? They had Tommy Amaker. He got fired, and nobody cared. It was a sigh of relief among the Mission faithful when he got fired from Ann Arbor after never reaching the big dance. Did you know that actually never reached the NCAA tournament all those years he was a head man at Michigan? Previously served on the staff of Coach K at Duke, and people thought, oh, a slam dunk hire. Came over as the head man, went to the NIT, I believe, a couple of times, even made it far in the NIT. But that wasn't a big dance, playing in the NIT at Madison Square Garden. And he failed plenty of times there, and enough to say Michigan had a long enough leash for him and had to move on. And it did, and it hired John Beilein from West Virginia. He came on board, obviously not great success right off the bat, but after a couple of seasons on the job, Beilein started resurrecting the Michigan Hoops program. And you know what? You have to pay him a lot of respect for what he did. But once again, where the program started when he took over a program that hadn't been to the NCAA tournament in numerous years, and then he brought them. By the way, John, I know you're a Sparty guy, but you have to take into account and bring up the fact that he brought them to multiple Final Fours and to multiple national championship games. And that could not be said about Tommy Amaker before him. And it had been a long time where Michigan basketball once again was dormant, was stuck in a rut, wasn't doing anything of high level of success. And MSU ran all over Michigan basketball for the longest time there with Coach Tom Izzo. And, you know, MSU still has the Izzone, is rich in tradition with its basketball program, and because of one Tom Izzo. Yet Coach Beilein of late, you know, until this past big dance, really you could say had Tom Izzo in Michigan State's number. Obviously got beaten by Sparty Nation 3 times this past season and did not make it as far as Sparty did this past big dance. As Sparty advanced all the way to the Final Four, and Michigan got ousted in the Sweet 16 and in devastating fashion. Could not even score the basketball against Texas Tech. Yet you have to give, once again, John Beilein a lot of props and a lot of respect for what he did building up that Michigan basketball program and once again making it a national brand.
Well, we look to the future because in sports, that's the way it goes. I mean, John Beilein signed the deal. He's already gone. Ward Manuel came out on Monday and said that the Wolverine program will conduct a national search. Is there a name that you want? Obviously, I think those that want to joke around and be silly will talk about Rick Pitino, but I do think that there are a plethora of coaches that could do the job really well for the Wolverines.
Well, I think you have to name off Brad Stevens from the Boston Celtics. And before him, even Billy Donovan of the Oklahoma City Thunder. Remember, his Thunder got ousted in the first round, and their near future hopes of making a deep run in the playoffs don't look that bright. And he's on the hot seat, maybe on the hottest seat of all in the NBA among headmen. But I don't think he's in, a great position. Let's just say that. I think his days are numbered as head man of the Oklahoma City Thunder, especially if the Thunder don't make the playoffs next season or don't make it out of the first round next season. And remember, he's a guy that won back-to-back national championships at Florida, won all these different SEC titles and deep runs in the NCAA tournament he made. So I think he's the guy that's candidate number one. After him, it's got to be Brad Stevens, who I think has learned now the hard way in the NBA that it's hard to coach these guys that feel like they're entitled, these stars of the NBA, such as Kyrie Irving, who does not look like he's returning to Beantown for another campaign next season. So I think he's starting to view the NBA as something that maybe he's not made out to coach it in the long term. And maybe thus he makes a return to the college coaching ranks. And if I'm Ward Manuel, the athletic director of the University of Michigan, I at least make a call to Donovan and to Stevens. And once again, for me, John, those are candidates 1 and 2. Donovan, number 1, Stevens, number 2.
I'm enjoying conversation with Vito Chirco, host of Two Bad Hombres and Tigers Talk with Chirco and Company. Follow him on Twitter at Vito Jerome. Whenever there's breaking news regarding Michigan, I always enjoy having a conversation because Vito does pay attention and he's in the know, has conversations with those that are affiliated with Michigan. I'll leave you with this. Are you concerned that because of the nature of the departure of John Beilein, that it's going to be a little bit tough to replace him? And now you also have to replace a head coach, and you also have to replace potentially 3 players that were going to be strong contributors to Michigan. Are you fearful that maybe Michigan in 2020 NIT bound?
Well, no. Come on, John. Really? Come on, man. Sorry to, rile me up now, okay? But honestly, no. I mean, they've been favored as a team to win it all next season, along with Sparty. Okay, so the Michigan Wolverines, the Michigan State Spartans, they could arguably be the first and second best teams in the nation next season, definitely in the Big Ten. So just because Beeline are leaving the sidelines at U of M doesn't mean that Michigan is taking a nosedive and not make the big dance now next season. So that's ludicrous. It's asinine. You can use a lot of adjectives to describe what you just said, John. But all I know is that whoever takes over that job at Michigan is going to be in a good position. Michigan's still strong going into the 2019-2020 campaign. Maybe not as strong as Michigan State, Denny Lansing, yet still, you can argue right now. You can flip that to 2. But Michigan and Michigan State are 1 and 2 in the Big Ten and are 2 of the top 5 teams in the entire nation next season.
Thanks for taking time out of your busy day. I look forward to having a fun conversation with you this week on Two Bad Hombres, Tigers Talk. Lots to get into, man. I can't wait to record with you. Thanks so much. And listen, I know you might be sad, you might be disappointed, but keep in mind that the recovery of Michigan might not go as smoothly as you're thinking. So sitting in this chair, all I can say is it's great that the Michigan State Spartans will continue to dominate, and we might be talking about a 5-6-game winning streak consecutively versus the Wolverines. So I sit in this chair pretty proud, and thank you so much for joining me.
No problem. And guess what? It's not going to happen, okay? MSU is not going to win 5 or 6 straight against Michigan. I'll leave you with that.
Bye, Vito. Talk soon.
Yep, adios. Great stuff. Bye-bye.
Always enjoy a conversation with Vito. Next, I'm going to check in with Steve Deace, host of the Michigan Podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. I am certain he'll have some good insights regarding John Beilein leaving for the NBA and what's next for the program. I'm going to dial up Steve right now. All right, on this day where John Beilein decided and signed a contract with the Cleveland Cavaliers, I'm talking to the host of the Michigan Podcast. You can find it anywhere podcasts are available. You can follow Steve Deace on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. Steve, what was your reaction to the news of the day?
Well, I think like everybody, when it first broke this morning, complete and total shock. Because John let it be known last year when he was willing to take the Detroit Pistons job. I don't think we know this for sure now. That was never about leverage or anything else. He had a desire. That was the last level he's not coached at, from NAIA to high school to Division II to all the way here to the top of Division I. And the only place left that he hadn't coached was the NBA. So I think he would have taken that job last year if it was offered to him. But when it wasn't offered to him, he was pretty adamant, that he was done and that he was going to probably ride out into the sunset here on his last contract at Michigan at 66 years old. And so I think a couple of things have occurred since a year ago. One is the ongoing FBI corruption trials and guilty pleas, and the fact you've got coaches on wiretaps, literally making, quote, strong-ass offers, and other coaches having their assistants saying, well, yeah, he's paying DeAndre Ayton $10,000 a month out of his pocket. And I understand why the NCAA hasn't done anything yet. They had to wait for those trials to end. But I think given the fact they just decided to let North Carolina get away with creating a fake academic environment for years, and what we've seen with Bruce Pearl at Auburn and everywhere else, I could see that where John maybe didn't have a lot of confidence the NCAA would clean the sport up. And I think this transfer portal and now letting 8 players sign with agents. So, Michigan's the last few years had several players leave early. He's had to re-recruit his own roster on the fly while recruiting future prospects. He's 66. He had a heart bypass last year. He's always wanted to coach in the NBA. The Michigan program is in pretty strong shape. They've gone from some of the worst facilities in the Big Ten to maybe collectively the best or one of them. You look at, the next coach is going to inherit a roster with 7 or 8 top 150 or better prospects returning or signed up to be on the roster next year. So I think he just decided if he was ever going to go, and given the continued evolution of the sport, or de-evolution as the case may be, I think he just decided that now is the time. And so when you step back for a few minutes and did all that math, it made more sense than it originally did when you had the initial shock.
Do you think some of the angst of the Michigan fans who are not happy with the news of the day is that he chose the Cleveland Cavaliers, an organization that just hasn't been known for winning in the last few seasons? It seems like it's a tough job to take if that's going to be your first NBA job.
Yeah, I think that has something to do with it. I also think, the owner there is a Sparty. And now Tom Gore is the owner of the Pistons is as well. But, a lot of Michigan fans are Piston fans too. But I think there's some thought going back 20 years ago to when George Steinbrenner, a huge Ohio State fan, booster, drafted Drew Henson and paid him an ungodly sum of money to leave Michigan and play baseball. And to this day, Henson will tell you he appreciated the money, but it was a mistake for him. And he missed that time. And that really set Michigan's football program back at a time that they were kind of dominating Ohio State. And that's right when Jim Tressel took over. And so, fan bases, every fan base has this, and they get conspiratorial. And sometimes those conspiracies are true. But, also tomorrow night when they have that draft lottery, if he gets the number 1 pick, and it's Zion Williamson, he's going to look a lot smarter than he looked 48 hours ago. So keep that in mind.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think that's one thing that I think John Beilein would love to have the opportunities to coach some blue chippers. What do you think about John Beilein's coaching style and how it could translate to the NBA?
I think this idea that, his emphasis on fundamentals and those sorts of things won't translate. And, even though him and Brad Stevens are really close, they're different people. First of all, he's almost 25 years older than Brad Stevens. Keep that in mind, and if you go back to when John first got here, he had to take over. Tommy Emiker was not a good coach here, but he did better than I think people think because he was digging out of a nuclear winter. So, he left him a couple of okay players in Manny Harris and Deshaun Sims. And so John had to, had his style that he was known for, kind of his glorified Princeton approach. and he kind of forced that on those teams. And then he won with undervalued, underwhelming recruits like Zach Novak and Stu Douglas. And, they actually won a Big Ten championship together once they brought Trey Burke in. But if you look at the way Michigan's played the last few years, where he allowed, a heavy ball screen offense, Trey Burke to really take control of that offense, and that's continued now to Darius Morrison. Well, Darius Morrison was before Trey Burke, but I'm thinking of Derek Walton. You saw it. You see it now with Xavier Simpson and Jordan Poole. Michigan plays a lot of an NBA style of an offense. This is not the big, thick playbook that John is known for. He evolved defensively, realized he couldn't coach defense. And so hired, Billy Donnelly, and then eventually, when he left to Northwestern, Luke Yaklich. So this is a guy that has actually evolved and changed his style quite a bit in order to be successful. So I think that he has a lot of more experience where Brad Stevens is concerned, applying more flexibility to sort of his rigid focus of fundamental basketball than Brad Stevens did. And a lot of that is just age and experience. So, to me, it comes down to this, brother. If they do right with one of these, they're going to get a top 3 pick. If they get Zion Williamson, now I don't know how Colin Sexton and Jai Morant play together, but let's say they can make a trade, somebody who really wants the Morant if they get the number 2 pick, and they get a nice bounty where that's concerned. I mean, I could see. Look at the Eastern Conference. I mean, if you put a Zion Williamson in there and they get one decent guard to go along with Colin Sexton, I don't know that they couldn't go from 19 wins to 38 or 39 and be an 8th seed in the playoffs. So I think a lot of John Beilein's success, if he fails at Cleveland, and the odds are higher that he will fail than be successful, just because most NBA coaches fail. But if he fails, it won't be because he's a curmudgeon. He's not that actually at all. He's willing to evolve. He's fairly flexible. If he fails, it's because they blew this top 3 pick. It didn't work out, and therefore they couldn't have a building block to attract free agents from there. They just didn't have the players.
Turning our attention back to the Michigan Wolverine basketball team, from your understanding of what you're reading online and seeing, who are the fans potentially clamoring for, and who would really be the best fit to take over this job if Ward Manuel finds the right guy to take over the great work that John Beilein did?
Well, I just published an article on our website at Wolverine Digest where I would look at this as the AD. I've got to have my criteria set first. And, the problem Michigan has here is that for as long as John's been there and how much success he's had, we don't have the ideal next guy in from his coaching tree. There was a lot of hope that was going to be LaVall Jordan. And he left and went to Butler, which is kind of the grooming program for college coaches and has been going back, to Thad Matta 15, 20 years ago. And the problem is that, LaVall got off to a really good start his first year. And then the last 2 years, they finished, I think, in last place. So you can't bring that guy in right now. And that would have been your most logical, that would have been our Pat. I know you're a Sparty, so that would have been our Pat Narduzzi. Or if you go back, say 10 years ago, if Izzo had gone to the NBA and Brian Gregory really had it cooking at Dayton, he'd have been the automatic go-to guy, if you know what I'm saying. Okay, so Michigan doesn't really have that right now. And so they're going to have to go outside of the John Beilein coaching tree. I think that's fine. I mean, everybody from Carol Hutchins, the outstanding softball coach, to Bo Schembechler, John Beilein, a lot of Michigan's best coaches ever were people who had no previous, ties to the university. So number one, you're looking for somebody with a proven track record as a head coach. All right, because that proven track record gives you an idea of how potentially successful they could be with superior tradition, recruiting base, exposure, and those kinds of advantages. Similar to you could project John Beilein could be really good at Michigan based off the fact he was able to take West Virginia to the Elite Eight, a team that doesn't have nearly Michigan's advantages basketball-wise. So that's the first thing you're looking for, somebody with an established, proven track record as a head coach. Then you need somebody that understands that at Michigan, unless they clean up this sport, I don't even care if they hire Billy Donovan. The going rate for players and amongst those top 25, 30 players. I mean, it's Tom Izzo. I think it's on the Bruce Bowen wiretap saying, I'm not paying for players. I mean, other than Mike Krzyzewski, and Roy Williams, there's not another living coach active in the sport who's had more success than he is. And he can't navigate it. So even if you hire a Billy Donovan, you're not getting those top 15, 20 players, unless they're highly academic-oriented guys, which are rare. So you have to bring in a guy that knows that your sweet spot recruiting-wise. You need to recruit nationally, guys in the 50 to 150 range. And so you have a balance between recruiting and development, meaning you can't spend so much time going for the brass ring recruiting guys that aren't really recruitable if you're not going to cheat outright. On the other hand, you can't just settle for low 3-star mid-major prospects and say, well, we're going to coach them up. The league is too tough. There's a 20-game regular season. Expectations are too high now. Too much is invested in the program. So you got to understand that balance between recruiting and development, that sweet spot there at a, what I would say is a top 15 overall job like a Michigan. And then you need somebody, if you're going to coach at Michigan in any sport, you got to take the term student athlete seriously. And then the fourth thing I would say is you have to be relatively clean. Now, in reaction to what happened with the Fab Five, which now doesn't the whole thing with the Fab Five, regardless of if you rooted for him or hated him, but based on what we know about college basketball now, doesn't Ed Martin look like, a freaking AA, pawn shop owner compared to what we're seeing nowadays? All right. So Michigan went way over the top, self-punitive in response to those violations, which looks kind of stupid now because, now coaches just, violate NCAA rules on a wiretap, and they're still out there recruiting top 5 recruiting classes. So for Michigan, who cares about NCAA rules? No one does, and the NCAA doesn't. But what you're looking for is somebody who is relatively clean, meaning their integrity level won't, lives up to the standards set by the university as a whole. I wouldn't give a rip about, whether they text a guy in a quiet period, all the other stuff that John Beilein used to walk into coaching clinics where they were coaching or camps where coaches would come and watch players. And if guys weren't sitting in the rafters, like NCAA regulations, he'd point that out. Nobody cares about that. No, all that stuff is irrelevant nowadays. So as long as you're not violating the academic and, safety integrity for the student body of the university, the rest of that stuff that Michigan's been obsessed with the last few years, by comparison of what the NCAA is letting go, who the frick cares about any of that?
Enjoying a conversation with Steve Deace, host of the Michigan Podcast. You can follow him on Twitter, a great follow, at Michigan Podcast. Now, Steve, I'll leave you with this. I think a great compliment that you can pay to John Beilein and the work that he did is that if you remember when he came to Michigan, post Tommy Amaker and the struggles that they had with Brian Ellerby and things like that, he brought the Michigan basketball program on par with football. I mean, people were talking about, really investing in basketball, the venue, like you mentioned, all the success, getting to the NCAA final twice, the Final Fours, the great memories. He really brought a lot of great memories to that program and really brought that program on par with football. In terms of what John Beilein's legacy will be, what will it be for you?
He's the greatest Michigan basketball coach ever. If you look at the last 5-year run. In the last 5 years, when you combined NCAA tournament wins and first round draft picks, the only 2 programs that are better in those 2 combined stats than Michigan are Duke and Kentucky. And when you look at the respective recruiting pools, each of those universities, one of these things that they used to say is not like the other. If you go back since 2012, Michigan has won 2 regular season Big Ten championships, 2 Big Ten tournament championships, been to 4 Sweet 16s and 5 Sweet 16s and 2 national championships. I mean, that's the best run. I mean, back-to-back 31 seasons. He's the GOAT. I mean, he's the closest thing the basketball program has had to Bo Schembechler, and he did it at a time where the league was really strong, where his in-state rival was the strongest that program for an extended period of time has ever been. In fact, I went back entering last season and looked at, because Michigan fans like to say, well, if the Ed Martin thing had never happened, Tom Izzo wouldn't have had so much success at Michigan State. That may be or may not be true at the beginning of his career. But what's amazing is if you look at since John Beilein reestablished Michigan's program and returned them to the tournament in 2009, from 2009 to 2018, Tom Izzo actually averaged more wins a season those years than he did the decade before John Beilein brought Michigan back to the NCAA tournament. Which means, dude, he was taking on a Hall of Fame coach at the zenith of his career in his own state. Not to mention Wisconsin basketball at its historic greatness. And you look throughout the rest of the course of the Big Ten, Thad Matta, arguably the greatest basketball coach Ohio State ever had. I mean, this is the arena that he walked into, and he didn't. And his peers voted him the cleanest coach every single year. He's the GOAT. There's no question about it. I mean, they're not going to get somebody that will do better than that. The question is, can you get somebody that can maintain what has already been built? And when you look at all of the resources Michigan has to offer, the exposure, I actually think there's a second tier of coaches in college basketball now that don't want to go, what LSU's doing and Arizona's doing and some of the rest of these one and done schools that haven't minded, calling a recruit too much or, the kinds of things that are minor violations. I think there's a lot of those coaches that are in these leagues where anything goes that I think we're going to be surprised even in May how many of these coaches are going to say, you know what, I would love to go to a major conference where I don't have to deal with this OK Corral, Old West, all the other slime and everything else. It's not why I got into this sport. I don't want to have to deal with that. I need a brand big enough that brings me players without having to deal with that. And I think the announcement today of bringing in a search firm, some of these names you're seeing on some of the, and I really respect, the Michigan sites around the internet. I cite them on my own podcast often, but a lot of them are talking to people that are close to Beeline and kind of, the Michigan extension. You're not going to go bring in, you can't have a national search firm isn't going to come back and say, yeah, we're going to hire Juwan Howard. They're not going to do that. All right, because their ass is in a sling if that doesn't work. You have Nike involved in this. I think you're going to get a proven head coach from a power conference is going to take this job if they can't land, one of their big fish. And I think the odds would be low. I think the odds are higher for Billy Donovan than Brad Stevens. He may be NBA'd out, but at the very least, I'd call them and make them say no. But I think you'll see Michigan in the end get a proven power conference head coach will take this job.
Always enjoy the conversation with Steve Deace. Follow him on Twitter at Michigan Podcast. Go over to YouTube and type in Michigan Podcast. A great subscribe. Videos are definitely worth checking out. Steve, thank you so much. I look forward to talking to you down the road.
You got it, brother. Take care.
Yep, thank you very much. Well, that was Steve Deace. Always brings great insights regarding Michigan and Michigan basketball. All kidding aside, John Beilein did a great job with the Michigan program. Like I said, like to kid around on Twitter a little bit with the takes regarding the fact that he took the money and ran, but there's a little truth to that, realizing, like Steve said, like Vito said, like the news that's out there, when you recruit these players and they leave, it's tough. It's tough to keep the train going. And when you're 66 years old, taking on a new challenge might be just what was in order for John Beilein. And the opportunity, the gamble, the opportunity to coach Zion Williamson might be just one where, hey, he sits back and maybe he can be the Phil Jackson of this generation where he sits back and lets Zion do his job, and he can sit back and be one of those coaches where, he doesn't have to do a whole heck of a lot of quality coaching. He can let, talented superstars do their thing. And in the NBA, that's what it takes. Build a roster full of superstars, sit back, don't get too much involved, don't stifle progress, and maybe John Beilein will end up being the smartest guy in the room. Thanks, everybody, for listening. You've just downloaded the latest edition of the Motor City Sports Rant. I appreciate it. We'll find you guys again next week.
Okay, nice, idiot. You. Bye-bye.
Good day, sir. I said good day.
All right. Take care now. Bye-bye then.
Loser.